Welcome everybody to the sixth episode of the ParcelCast with Jesta I.S. I'm Justin Cramer, co-founder of ProShip multi-carrier shipping software, and I'm here today with Arvind Gupta, President of Jesta I.S. Arvind, would you like to talk a little bit about yourself and what we will be going over today?
Oh, hi, thank you, Justin. So we at Jesta have been in the business of building enterprise software solutions for retailers, wholesalers, multi-branded, vertically integrated brands, clothing, fashion, and everybody in between. And what is fascinating is the space or retail and wholesale and fashion and direct-to-consumer businesses continuously evolving. And especially in last 12 to 14 months, ever since the onset of pandemic, it is almost impossible to not reflect on the implications that pandemic, once in a generational event, has had on overall business environment, in particular for retail, wholesale, and direct-to-consumer businesses. So I would like us to have a little bit of chat in next half an hour or so and see what are the implications and more importantly, what are some of the considerations for businesses, consumers, and all the other stakeholders who are involved in various parts of supply chain in that industry.
Excellent, excellent. And let's go ahead and jump right in then. One of the big phrases that's been around for the last several years is omnichannel. And I think you and I, in talking earlier, we both agree that there's still a long ways to go for existing businesses to hit omnichannel. Many of them are making great strides right now in business to consumer or B2C sales, but there's a little bit about the B2B market may not, or the business to business market may not be as caught up. How do you see businesses changing to react to customers' needs to buy multiple products from a single site?
Yeah, the omni-channel is quite frankly an idea or time of which had arrived almost 10 years ago. What has now actually has happened is effectively kind of you hit on, Justin, that business to business and business to consumer and so-called perceived channel segregation is a thing of past. Now, it's a customer is a customer is a customer, and order is an order, inventory is an inventory. So, and access to information for any point of interaction from a customer's point of view, whether it is a business or a consumer, or inventory that customer is, or product or service that customer is seeking to obtain, that access to information is no longer purviews of a individualized, segregated department or a team within an enterprise. Where we are now seeing where things are heading now is that it's all coming together as more unified commerce, where it's all commerce and it all ought to be perceived as unified, whereby whether you are interacting in a call center with a customer, and the customer could be a business or a consumer, or whether you are responsible for the digital e-com side of business, or whether you are a supplier or a distribution center, or even in a physical store, everybody has to have access to the same information about the overall picture of the order. And that's where future is leading us to. And businesses have a very, very long catch up to do to get to that single version of truth and enablement of what you're calling is omnichannel, and I'm saying is evolution into the unified commerce.
So would a good example here be something like a manufacturer that in the last few years has put together a direct to consumer or a B2C market, and maybe they've got a lot of extra tracking capabilities there, they've got a lot of extra visibility, but they're not treating their wholesale business, their B2B business as efficiently, as effectively, and with the same amount of visibility as they would direct to consumer. Would that be a good example there?
But that's one of the ones, right? Because at the end of the day, what pandemic, I keep going back to pandemic because I think it's a great trigger event that has practically shaken everybody out of slumber and take notice. And issues or the challenges that previously were sometimes getting hidden under the carpet just because either too much demand would come in and therefore any issues that you may have in your supply chain was just kind of masked, or just because you're suddenly expanding your market to other markets and therefore you never really knew some of the challenges. So what has happened is business to business almost always had a little bit more collaboration and expectation relative to communication and a little bit of agility relative to where the demand is and where the order is. But the moment you brought in a business to consumer in mix, businesses who are serving up to the consumer directly and businesses directly, and if they're treating two as a separate channels, two separate channels of inventory, but finding themselves caught between two boats where excess inventory on one side and then practically no inventory to pull from on the direct to consumer side. So increasingly, yes, you're right. It's the businesses who are serving both markets. They ought to begin to see that end of the day, it's a single customer on the other side and single view of the inventory and how to best maximize and optimize the SLA and the service level to the consumer, notwithstanding if the consumer is a customer or a business on the other side.
And how do retailers solve these challenges? I mean, obviously it's a very big challenge, like you said. Retailers, manufacturers, they may have had some of these channels in existence for decades, and while it's worked in the past, obviously the cracks are starting to show now. What is it? What type of technology? What type of processes might a shipper use to unify that B2C and B2B and, well, basically all of their channels of order execution?
Yeah, this is it's always a journey. And supply chain and the links of supply chain that enable the journey. Journey being on one side, you have this consumer or a business as a customer, and on the other side, you have these retailers, and the retailers have on the other side of that distributors, and distributors may have manufacturers overseas or wherever it is. So, and technology fortunately does come handy to enable and eliminate a whole bunch of, let's call it, stickiness. So first and foremost, it would be that make sure the silos and the information that needs to be transmitted gets transmitted and communicated without getting any additional embellishment, if you will. So the raw data, raw transactions that are coming in, the actual demand signals that are coming in from consumers, or actual orders that are being captured from the consumers or businesses, to be communicated all the way back to the factories by leveraging varieties of technologies, not only just EDI, which has always been there, but also more supply chain visibility platforms where all the counterparties together can see the order journeys thereof, and at the same time respond or react to those signals that they change. For instance, last year, when the demand suddenly probably collapsed, especially from business to business in a whole bunch of industries, but then if you're in a grocery or a pharmaceutical, the demand, quite frankly, skyrocketed. So those signals, when suddenly that happens, the best thing you could do is that make sure all links in your supply chain have visibility to that. Now, on the other side of that, the point you kind of raised, which is the shipment side, increasingly, as a result of pandemic, what has happened is customers, businesses, whoever may be who's placing the order, they're expecting delivery all the way to their door, store, or distribution center. This is no longer going to be expected that, drop it on the curbside on a shipping port, and we're going to pick it up from there with the trucks and whatever you may have. So it's increasingly expected that whoever is ultimately responsible for delivering the order, that they have automation and agility in the shipping methodologies and processes and systems that allows them to seamlessly ship those orders internationally or domestically all the way down to the door, and more importantly, providing visibility of all those shipments until such time product actually arrives in the hand of consumer or in the business.
Yeah, basically from cart to customer is what a lot of industries are saying now. I'd like to switch tacks here a little bit. As we all are, well, many of us in North America right now are experiencing a rather unusual winter, especially in the southern portions of the United States. We can't help but think about uh, our impact on the environment. With omni-channel shipping, are we seeing a positive or negative impact from the environmental area?
Justin, great question. Now, one of the things, and it's very important to reflect upon, it's as we know, I mean, shipping business, retailing business, or wholesale distribution business are some of the oldest business that have been there since somebody created or come up with an idea of a widget and found a use for that or market for that. And then, yeah, things have evolved over the last 30 years due to globalization and let's call it dissemination of all the supply chain, and it's no longer relevant to know where the product is getting manufactured or how it's getting manufactured. What is relevant is that is it coming in a high quality and the value in the hand of customer in the fastest possible period of time. So in that regard, a lot of traditional touch points where you will fax an order, send it to a supplier, who will then send it to other factories, and then a lot of paperwork gets printed. And when somebody's ready to ship, wherever the shipment is taking place, you will do picking, packing, shipping documents, all of that. Or increasingly now, when the lot of what we call is dark stores, where retailers, stores are acting as fill locations or mini distribution centers, they would be expected to print out whole reams of documents for every single shipment. All of that as a result of enablement through technology and digitization initiatives that some of these businesses have undertaken and are taking increasingly more and more, are practically making it irrelevant, unnecessary to print those documents. It's all basically world is heading towards, and we see from our clients that they're completely going paperless picking to shipping workflows, where through the, for example, shipment, payment, shipment APIs such as ProShip, it's no longer required to print documents. It could be all digital and it could be all sent electronically in a digital scannable format on the other side, so that all you have is a mobile device, which everybody has is anyways in their pocket, and they can spit it out and then scan it and be done with confirmation and taking possession of whatever product is being shipped on the other side. So yeah, the environment impact, I expect it to be fairly significant just because of less need for printing paper at every single point of the journey in the supply chain.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point there about using things that already exist. There's a lot of applications out there now that can continue to run on the mobile devices people already have, rather than having to buy separate ones. And just an anecdote out there on paper, we were working with a retailer, basically a catalog and internet retailer, and they had an older system to do their pick pack, and it was all paper based. And we wanted to make some changes, and they said, we currently have $1 million worth of forms sitting in our processes right now. We can't make that change until we process through them. And what was more amazing is that processing time was less than 6 months. Just imagine the amount of paper that you'd have to have $1 million worth of paper in your process. So
yeah, you're spot on, and this is where some of those things will take time, but it could always start somewhere with the closest to the point of shipment, where make it, especially with now with everybody's carrying practically a supercomputer from 1990s in their pocket, in the back pocket. So and it's just a matter of enabling and implementing some of the low-hanging fruit processes and applications to make it scannable and do away with the need of having to physically print the documents and work off of the physical documents.
Exactly. But I think you mentioned something else that I'd like to dig into. You mentioned what I'm just going to interpret as the automation of data movement. In the past, we used to have to hand type from one system to another. As a matter of fact, in the shipping world, you used to be able to get a doc tab or a document tab on the bottom of a label, so you could peel it off, have the tracking number, have the cost. You'd stick it on the picking slip. That would go back into a data room where people would type all that information back into the ERP, so that goods could be decremented. It's called post goods issue in an SAP system. So money could move, all these other things could happen. With your products, are you seeing a increase in the use of various forms of EDI in order to eliminate paper?
Yeah, answer is a qualified yes and more, Justin. What's happening now is that systems are effectively under the hood. They're looking to automate and streamline what has been done since the beginning, albeit manually and through phone calls and faxes. So from the time, for example, an order is placed based on whatever the demand may be and whoever may be on the other side, on the supplier side, yeah, EDI is a great enabler because it eliminates so-called interpretation and subjectivity. Because as you know, supply chain is increasingly dispersed across pretty much all continents, including Asia and increasingly now Latin America and even some parts of Africa as well. So EDI eliminates the noise from communication of whatever you in head office, wherever your head office might be, is placing an order, and whoever the factory or a supplier on the other side might be is interpreting the data. But it is more than just EDI. Increasingly, what's also being done through, for example, our products and our clients are increasingly wanting to do is orders are getting sent out, but then subsequent to that, all the order journey through the head office tracking and clearing of all whatever needs to be cleared electronically through the customs and such. And more importantly, once the product hits the dock in your warehouse and distribution center, and automation and automatic through the system, through the machine learning, anticipating what is going to come in, and preparing appropriate workflows in the warehouse automatically to pull those products in, orders in, and at the same time, with the literally click on handful of buttons on the mobile apps in their pocket, and then effectively getting it out of the door quickly without having it staying in the four walls, out of the door, and without having to actually go through what you mentioned earlier, putting different kind of labels and the sticky and the piggyback labels and taking the sticky off and then, having the same physical tag move from one place to another place. And every step of the way, somebody removes or peels or something else. All those are becoming increasingly thing of past, and quite frankly, they're not sustainable. And all of those could be, in fact, automated so that you don't have humans doing that peeling off function, and automatically whatever tag is put on electronically scanned automatically. And last point being the ultimate shipping, of course. End of the day, when it has to be shipped out, it has to have still appropriate labels, digitally or otherwise printed on the boxes relative to whatever carriers might be carrying it. Even that process has become incredibly automated by leveraging some of the platforms, some of the technology from your company and on, such as it automatically from systems triggers appropriate calls, and it spits out at the back end of it whatever label needs to be put on the box, and whoever picks it up ultimately takes it over to the final destination. So yeah, there's a lot of touching of the product, and every touch point marking or removing some of the physicalities, or all of that is getting, quite frankly, irrelevant with the adoption of some of the technologies that we bring to the market.
Yeah. So you talked a lot about the warehouse there. I want to pull us into the warehouse here and actually go back to something that we started earlier in our conversation, which is visibility. EDI, it sounds like, gives us a great opportunity. If I'm a receiver in a warehouse, on my mobile app, I can actually see that I'm going to get certain goods in today. If I'm a warehouse manager, I can see that I'm going to get these goods in and prepare if I'm going to do any cross-docking, things of that nature. Could you dig a little bit more into visibility and where Jesta is focusing on visibility right now?
Yeah, Jesta has traditionally always been the foundation, the plumbing for our clients, whether they are retailer, wholesaler, manufacturer, distributor, fashion, vertically integrated brand, or somewhere in between. So as a foundational plumbing database, we are obsessed with automation and visibility. So what it translates to is that no matter where whatever is being purchased, no matter who is ordering it, we are always making sure that the information is consistent and persistent and near real time wherever practical. So what it boils down to is that every touch point from product inventory point of view, it is always visible and available. But more importantly, it is anticipation of what needs to happen in coming days in relation to whatever you're looking to deliver to your customers. And based on that anticipation, creating appropriate automation of the workflows and alerting, whether it is a head office to say, hey, we have 2 trucks arriving into the dock, into the warehouse 3 days from now, and be sure that automatically all the appropriate warehouse distribution center staff is alerted so they can prepare for that, for receipt of these goods coming on truck, or whether it's in the warehouse itself, in the 4 walls, that you have 60% of product is to be cross-docked. Make sure those are appropriately routed to outbound lanes or bays, if you will, automatically based on robotic scans, if you will, or RFID scans. And then at the end of the day, whatever has to be put away, make sure it's also automated so that it is put away based on the velocity of which product is expected to move. But then more importantly, on the other side of it, if, as you know, in a lot of businesses even today, they are getting product to their own physical stores to get it close to the consumer. So on the other side, that further automation and appropriate workflow dissemination into the store as well, that, hey, by the way, so many products are arriving on Saturday morning or whatever the day it may be, depending on schedule. So they are prepared to receive it, ready to put it on the shelves. And the last mile, if a product that is coming into a store from orders that were placed in head office is in response to a customer who actually ordered this online, then it has to have automated alerting to the consumer to say, hey, by the way, hey, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer, your order is coming into my store 2 miles from your house, and here's the directions if you want. And when you come in, we'll enable for you to come in and alert to us so that we can bring the product for you to pick it up curbside. So that's where Jesta's focus has been, enablement of all these automation, visibility, alerting in a manner that is actually very, very, very transparent and consistent.
Moving on to that, since we got back to the customer, which is, I think, in the end, really important to any business, because if you don't have happy customers, they're not going to succeed. Is Jesta experiencing any areas where retailers are actually trying to communicate or set expectations for delivery time? As we're still in the pandemic, guaranteed service levels are gone, though the carriers are relatively on time. That setting of the expectation we've found in the past has really done a great job of keeping customers from complaining, because if they know it's going to be a 3-day delivery, and in the past it was a 2-day delivery, as long as we're upfront with them, they're happy. Have you seen any of your customers move towards that? Is that something that you guys are pushing through some of the Jesta products?
Yeah, it's a multi-dimensional answer, and how we have seen some of the agile retailers, brand manufacturers, businesses are looking to do. On one side, they're looking to offer up more variety of options to the customer, whether it is buy online, pick up in store, or buy online, pick up at curbside on one side, or whether it could be that a customer is actually making an appointment, make sure that customer actually can make an appointment and show up in a safe environment to get the product directly, physically available to them. So that's one side of that. On the other side of it, it's retailers are increasingly shortening so-called the last mile, by virtue of, and I hinted early on, that pandemic forced practically overnight whole bunch of retailers to turn their stores into dark stores. So the lights out. However, the ones who are more agile and more in front of the digitization journey, they turned those dark stores into mini fulfillment centers. So they would, as opposed to having a product that's going to leave from their distribution center from other end of the country, if they had a physical store near to where the customer actually is looking to buy or bought the product from, they will just simply get the store near to the customer, act as a fulfillment center, and get the product shipped from there, thereby reducing some of the time. So that's the second lever that retailers we are seeing, just as clients we see are increasingly adopting to use stores as a fill sites. But then the third thing is, of course, to your point about expectations. Amazon has elevated the expectation in terms of shipment and the shipping times to a whole other level. And quite frankly, it's great for the consumer, and businesses have to match up to that and rise up to that. Pandemic is just the trigger that I mentioned earlier on, is expose some of the gaps within in terms of SLAs. So they are communicating now that, and they are elevating some of the, optimizing some of the shipping workflows by introducing, for example, I mentioned early on, that ProShip type of automated shipping carrier integration protocols are in place, whereby there may be, if you have only a relationship with one carrier, that carrier may be overwhelmed with whatever reason may be. But on the other hand, now what we are seeing from the clients is, retailers, is that they will sign up with multitude of carriers into each jurisdiction or each market, including some of those couriers who may just deliver the product in the same local market overnight, or same within hourly basis, if you will. So ProShip being a centralized front to enablement of standardization of those carriers on the other side. And on the other side, it means that based on the orders, automatic selection based on the SLA that has been promised to the customer, it is increasingly managing that side of risk, whereby you commit 2 days and you have only one carrier, and that carrier got swamped, and now suddenly 2 days becomes 4 days and counting. That gets managed by having multiple carriers who can commit to 2 days, and then on the spot of shipment, it will choose the carrier that has the best chance to get the product within the expected SLA.
So one of the other things that you mentioned something I want to dig into. I want to start moving towards our agility conversation here. You mentioned that a lot of stores went to dark stores. They became warehouses. We all know that a lot of stores then moved to curbside pickup, still effectively a dark store with a will call, as we'd call it in a warehouse. But I think that stores, not to mention the fact that there's so much labor concerns in the entire retail market as it is, the entire fulfillment market. Labor is always a concern. But I personally feel that the concern of labor within a retail facility is probably the highest, because there's such a high level of diverse roles. There's stocking, there's back ordering, there's labeling, there's dealing with the customers, actually checking them out. And now we want to use that as a warehouse. Whereas, if you're in a warehouse, you're either receiving, you're picking, or you're shipping. Relatively simple, and a relatively small number of roles. And of course, those can be broken down into smaller ones if you need to. But in the retail, in a store / dark store, does your system provide a unified interface that allows somebody to go from one task to another without having to learn 3 or 4 new systems? Because I do think that's one of the best ways to retain talent, and one of the best ways to ship talent from one job to another job is by using a unified interface. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, it's absolutely a great question, great point to discuss a little bit further. So Jesta has always been, especially from the direct to consumer side of story, store, we believe that is going to continue to be relevant, whether it is dark or not dark in coming future. Hopefully it'll still become completely lighted up. Physical stores are the biggest brand footprint typical multi-channel retailer would ever have. If you look at Amazon, for example, even they are looking to open up, even beyond Whole Foods acquisition, they're looking to open up their concept stores in almost every market in North America and potentially global basis. So the physical store is going to be relevant. And Jesta's stance since the beginning has been that, therefore, the experience first and foremost to the associate, then ultimately to the customers in that physical stores ought to be so consistent and so persistent that it should not matter whether it is the customer buying online or customer interacting with physical product in a store. So towards that end, we have obsessed ourselves in making sure, to your point, unified UI, unified experience for the associate, that they are able to absolutely make no distinction and not have to have any learning curve whatsoever, whether it is a customer pulling a product from a rack and bringing it to a terminal to check out or self-checkout, or an order dropping into a store from e-com, from another store, or wherever it could be. Associates interaction and expected behavior and workflow for filling that order ought to be basically completely transparent. And towards that end, so we have built mobile apps and that connect back to the same checkout, same cart, as if a customer is walking out of the store on a physical checkout, if you will, on a traditional POS. But more importantly, the steps that associate is expected to take. You hinted that in warehouse you had these people who have done for decades, picking, packing, shipping, and they've trained, they have this muscle memory to do the things that need to be done whenever an order comes in. Now in store, staff is always sometimes temp, sometimes it's just people who have never done this before. So that's where the technology comes really handy through the mobile apps, paperless picking, whereby it's just very guided, very, very logical, where order information is there. They're expected to go into appropriate area in the store, just like in a warehouse, somebody would go and pull out the product and expect to scan, and confirmations happen at the time of scan. And then logically, when it gets to the last step, that once you reconfirm that everything that you're expected to pick has been picked, all in a guided manner, when it comes to the shipment, it's not expected associate to know anything at all, which carrier, how it's going to go, and what's going to have to happen. It ought to be completely automated, and this is what Jesta does by enablement integration of ProShip within, that based on the order SLA that comes in from wherever the order came from, it will automatically select the carrier and the shipping option and the routing option. And all they do is they push a couple of buttons on a mobile device and the order is done. It's becoming very, very relevant that there should not be any adoption barriers for associate from actually interacting with the customer on a checkout lane versus same associate doing the functions that would traditionally be done in a back office of picking, packing, and shipping for a customer order from the same physical store.
Labor is such an interesting conversation that's been showing up in the shipping market or in the logistics world for at least the last 5 years. One of the things that we've noticed is that by turning stores into origin points, those stores are often in population areas, so it does provide a better labor pool, just something that a lot of retailers are now starting to look at. But as we just went through, just the sheer number of things, the amount of agility that a store worker has to be capable of, keeping that simple and using a unified interface that we've been talking about. So you don't have to look at the shipping system. You don't have to look at a put away. You don't have a different system for point of sale. All of that does simplify things greatly. But what we're really talking about here, really putting together an entire enterprise software stack. The ability to use, as you mentioned, something like ProShip on the back end to ensure that shipment execution is done to meet customers' expectations at the lowest cost. Having Jesta's products in the warehouses, in the stores, things of that nature. But integrating that, I think having that integrated to the e-commerce suite, to, as you mentioned, all the EDI that needs to go back and forth, making it so that your enterprise software stack is put together is really important. I think we were chatting about this earlier, and the phrase we said is it can't just be a huge stack of products. They all have to be integrated, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely. I mean, integration is it's less of a technology integration of processes, and integration of the overall the counterparties, all the touch points in your supply chain, procedure thereof is probably more relevant and more important and more sticky sometimes. So and we are seeing increasingly that hey, best practices are best reflected by virtue of software product that forces the discipline and then gives them a path to start conversation. And then ultimately it's a journey, and the journey may never end. It's just basically, hey, the automation is just the beginning. But ultimately end of this is that, hey, you increasingly from an organization that is doing the grunt work of behind the scenes of whatever it could be, whether it is ordering, whether it is packaging, whether it is moving the product, to obsessing with customer in terms of what is customer ultimately wanting. How do we keep connected with the customer, and how do we make sure that a product or service offering is going to continuously be relevant for our customers? So it shifts the conversation, shifts the focus for organizations to see what they're really in for in the long run.
And Arvind, it sounds like what we're trying to do is put together a really small chain from order to execution, from order to inventory, all these other things. If we have too long of a chain there, I've heard the term whiplash and bullwhip effect. Could you talk a little bit about that, and how having too loosely connected or not properly connected enterprise software stack might lead to that?
Yeah, great question. And this is a classic, right? We have always seen that, business in general are very optimistic, and they should be. Otherwise, any entrepreneur who is pessimistic, they will not take risk, because by being entrepreneurial is by definition very risky endeavor. So there's a lot of positive energy typically in all enterprises. So what typically happens is a customer comes in, places an order for 10 widgets. The customer order, that customer places for 10, it goes to retailer's head office. They say, oh, I got an order for 10 units. I better buy 20 units, because who's to say that customer will come back again and buy another 10 widgets? So they will immediately create an order to their distributor for 20 units. Now the distributor who gets this order for 20 units, you'll see that, oh, geez, I got an order for 20 units, and who is to say maybe I get another order for another 20 units. So they will then immediately say, I better order 40 units from my supplier in China or wherever the factory might be. So they will then, the factory on the other side of the world, when they get that order for 40 units, they will say, geez, I got an order for 40. I might as well prepare for maybe 60 or 80 widgets, because there might be another order coming right behind it. So they will prepare and procure material to produce 80 units. Now, what has just happened, Justin? A simple small order of 10, that maybe only one-time order, has led to creation of 80 units worth of inventory at the other end of the world. So this is where we call it's a complete bullwhip, where it gets magnified. The information or the demand signals, they get amplified at every single step of the supply chain. And one of the ways to remove that whiplash, bullwhip effect, which ultimately leads to very large excess inventory and, quite frankly, sometimes wastage of resources to be invested into, for which the demand may never actually materialize, is making sure that you expose all the information from the original demand point, and have every stakeholder also reflect onto that and determine that and prepare for making sure that their appropriate resources are mobilized to deliver to the demand as much as possible within the SLA, and as much as possible within a real-time visibility as the demand is getting responded to.
Yeah, I think we've all experienced the bullwhip effect, especially those of us who are in professional services. The engineer says 1 hour, the project manager adds another hour. So I can see that happening in with retail orders as well. Switching subjects here, what impacts did Jesta see in the market during 2020, and how did your customers react within the product suite, both inside and out, in order to, basically, what did you see last year? That's a really long way of asking that question.
Yeah, last year was no doubt about that, by definition, because the pandemic was almost an inflection point for businesses especially businesses who are on the retail side, even wholesale side, is that they had to practically overnight prepare for collapse of demand from where it was or where they were forecasting to be 10% of their even most pessimistic forecast. And as you know, Justin, most of the businesses in the consumer goods, wholesale retail space, they always run into minimum 6 month, if not 9 month cycles where they will place orders for their forecast 6 to 9 months before the actual season was to start. So all businesses, bar none, they almost all of them got caught off guard with the risk of having excess inventory sitting in their wherever the inventory stores, warehouses might be. So we saw quite a large chunk of our customers actually responding quite, let's call it entrepreneurially and quite innovatively, in that some of them, they would try to use their stores which were shut down, I mentioned early on, they would convert them into dark stores and try to offer up more and more product inventory on the digital channels, and thereby able to liquidate some of the hedge or the risk of excess inventory, which ultimately is not going to get more value with every passing month, if you will. So that's one side where they're able to offer up and open up those dark stores through the backside as a fill sites, and therefore they're able to generate and drive up the digital side of revenue. But on the other side, they also begin to explore opportunities with dropship partners, market side partners, whereby they're able to offer a product from these dropship vendors, suppliers, directly to the consumer without having to take ownership of the inventory, so that they're able to then further expand their offering assortment through the digital channels without having to actually commit to buy. Then the other thing we saw happening last year is increased emphasis on drive on investment into the digitization period. They now no longer have an option. They have to have single version of truth, the whole order journey, no matter where it comes from, and implementation of persistent, consistent policies, not only for e-com business, but also all kind of business in all point of interaction and fulfillment journeys, if you will, to make sure that they have the technology and the tools ready whenever the pandemic is behind, when the customer in the new normal is looking to expect same digital unified commerce experience. So they are then ready to take on and capitalize on this new normal, if you will.
Yeah, I guess it kind of brings us all the way back to where we started with this, where companies that thought they were omni-channel but hadn't put all the pieces together yet came into rapid realization during the pandemic that they weren't. All right, so we've covered a lot today. I do want to give you a second here to give our audience any final advice, anything that you might want the market to know about the product services that Jesta might do, or just anything that we didn't get an opportunity to talk about that you think that our audience should know about.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I mean, some of the bullets we touched upon is treating customer, consumer, whether it's a business or a customer, with almost same, without any segregation, without having silos in terms of delivery of experience and or service, and making sure that on the backside, wherever the backside product inventory, supply chain, counterparties might be, offering up as much as possible same view of information in near time would be the call to action, I would say, to every business who might be listening on to this podcast. Then on the other side, it's always what happens after delivery of the product or service. So reflecting on and making sure that the experience and delivery of experience doesn't end by just delivering of the product or service. It's what happens after that. So post-delivery, whether it is returns, whether it is some other counter conversations that may be happening or need to happen. So making sure the data that is generated through the every touch point of journeys is mined and ultimately converted into meaningful information, whereby you can really truly take the experience not only for the one transaction, but for the lifetime of your relationship with the customer to the next level would be a great way to keep on keeping on the high in the radar of things and explorations to consider.
Excellent, excellent. All right, today my guest has been Arvind Gupta from Jesta I.S. If you've got any questions, please feel free to email us at sales@ProShipInc.com. We can pass along any questions for Arvind and his team. And we'd like to let you all know that next month we'll be diving into top pitfalls to avoid during new technology implementations with Josh Mayer of Summit Advisory Team. Again, I'd like to thank my guest today and wish you all a good day. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Justin.